take a look at this graph of car exports by country. China has had explosive growth, rising to the top and ending Japan's reign as the global export leader in 2023. It's crazy, especially because in 2018, they were exporting about as many cars as Slovakia. Yet, here we are. It gets even more impressive when you realize that the majority of China's auto exports are also from their own cars. It's not foreign brands. This isn't a situation like Mexico where they're technically exporting more cars than the US, but it's all American cars. Nope, China is genuinely starting to dominate here. So, how did this happen? Especially because just a few decades ago, their cars were almost seen as a joke by the West. Well, we have to go back to one of the first legal pillars of China's reform era, the Sino-Foreign Equity Joint Venture Law, passed on July 1st, 1979. It was a tiny law, just 15 articles, but politically it was enormous. Across the economy, this became one of the foundations of China's opening. But in cars, it became something even more specific, the basic architecture of the industry for the next 4 decades. See, in the years prior, China basically produced 0 passenger cars, just vehicles for the military. The entire country, in a year, produced fewer cars than a single Toyota plant produced in a week. And the government wanted to fix that. But not by importing though. They had deliberately set import duties on foreign cars at 260%. They wanted to build a domestic industry and concluded correctly that they had no way of doing that alone. So they made a bargain. Foreign automakers could enter the Chinese market, but only through 50-50 joint ventures with state-owned Chinese partners, and only with the explicit understanding that technology would be transferred to those partners. The market, in other words, would be traded for the technology. The joint ventures came fast. In 1983, Beijing Jeep became the first, a partnership with American Motors Corporation. In 1984, Shanghai Volkswagen launched, producing the Santana sedan that became the iconic Shanghai taxi. By the early 2000s, the industry was connected like this, very intertwined. This worked, but only partially. China got factories and modern assembly lines, but what it didn't get, and this is where the whole joint venture thing really fell short, was meaningful internal combustion engine, or ICE, technology. The foreign automakers kept the important stuff, especially engine technology, back home. A Stanford study actually put the numbers on this later. Only 8.7% of quality upgrades in a model made by a foreign joint venture ended up making it into comparable models by their Chinese partner. So Chinese carmakers became, for the most part, contract assemblers for foreign brands inside their own borders. SAIC and FAW became some of the most profitable state enterprises in China, but they didn't really learn how to engineer cars on their own. The domestic brand carmakers that existed outside the joint ventures, like Chery, Geely, Brilliance, and Great Wall, built cars that were 1 or 2 generations behind global standards. The 2007 Brilliance BS6 crash test in Germany captured this perfectly. The ADAC, Germany's largest automobile club, tested the car under the European New Car Assessment Program conditions. It earned a single star out of 5. The footage went viral. It became the symbol of Chinese cars in Western markets for years. But here's what most people don't know. Just 79 days later, Brilliance retested in Spain and scored 3 stars. And that speed of improvement would turn out to be a preview of something much bigger. By 2009, China overtook the United States as the world's largest car market, a position it's held every year since then. But even as the domestic market boomed, China's car exports remained negligible, almost entirely flowing to developing countries where price mattered more than quality. That was the issue. China had built the world's largest car market without building a world-class car industry. And as long as the battlefield was the internal combustion engine, it was never going to. So the Chinese government did something extremely wise and also kinda lucky. They decided to change the battlefield completely. The pivot wasn't sudden. As early as the late 1990s, Chinese leadership began identifying electric vehicles, or EVs for short, as a strategic priority. The argument, especially associated with Wang Gang, who later became Minister of Science and Technology and known as the father of China's electric car industry, was that China would never catch up in internal combustion engines. But EVs were a green field where everyone was essentially starting over. In 2001, EVs were included in the 10th Five-Year Plan, the government's main economic blueprint. In 2009, the 10 Cities, 1,000 Vehicles pilot program launched, aimed to do exactly what's in the name. In 2015, Made in China 2025, a decade-long master plan to transition the country from a low-cost assembly hub into a global, self-sufficient powerhouse for high-tech manufacturing, explicitly named new energy vehicles as one of 10 priority sectors. The total scale of Chinese government subsidies to the EV sector from 2009 through 2023 was about $230 billion, according to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, which also called that a conservative estimate. That makes it one of the biggest government bets on a single industry in modern history. But subsidies, while a major factor, yes, weren't the only explanation for China's success, because other countries had massive EV subsidy programs too. In Europe, 74% of EV subsidies effectively leaked overseas, because many of the cars, batteries, and components being purchased were imported. The same was true in the US at 51%. But in China, the subsidy money mostly stayed inside the country. Only 7% left. So the policy didn't simply create demand. It created demand that Chinese firms themselves would fully capture, and then reinvest into making the next car cheaper, better, and harder for foreign competitors to match. As for how their supply chain is domestic, China had already been quietly building it for 2 decades, for a completely different reason: consumer electronics. This is the key insight. China didn't build its EV industry from scratch. It built it on top of a battery industry it had already built for cell phones and laptops. For example, BYD, now the most known Chinese EV company, literally started as a rechargeable battery company in 1995. A year later, they were producing batteries approximately 40% cheaper than Japanese alternatives. CATL, now the world's largest EV battery maker with a 38% global market share, has a similar story. Its founder, Robin Zeng, started a company called Amperex Technology Limited, or ATL, in 1999 to make lithium batteries for mobile phones, at a time when Japan held 90% of the global lithium battery market. By 2003, ATL was supplying batteries for the iPod. In 2011, Zeng spun off ATL's vehicle battery division into CATL, because ATL had been acquired by Japan's TDK in 2005. And as a Japanese-owned subsidiary, it couldn't supply batteries for Chinese government-subsidized EVs. CATL landed a partnership with BMW in 2012, which basically proved to the world that they were the real deal. So when the government turned on the EV subsidies, there was already a massive domestic battery industry to absorb them, and Beijing made sure their companies captured the upside. In 2015, China issued a battery whitelist, limiting EV subsidies to cars using approved battery suppliers, basically all Chinese. Almost overnight, Korean and Japanese battery makers were locked out. Subsidies made up as much as 42% of the price of a new EV in China, so being cut out was a huge deal. Chinese suppliers' share of batteries used in China-sold EVs rose from below 70% in 2016 to nearly 90% by 2019. By 2025, almost 70% of global EV battery production capacity was located in China. Domestically, the subsidies had created something you really only see in China: an excess of supply. NIO, XPeng, Li Auto, Zeekr, plus the EV divisions of every existing Chinese automaker, plus Tesla, which opened its Shanghai Gigafactory in 2019. By that time, there were 500 EV manufacturers in the country, most of them brand new. The logic is you give a single big company everything and it gets complacent-ish. You give 100 startups enough money and they kill each other, but the survivors are very, very fit. The result was a price war, unlike anything in any other auto market on Earth. Just look at how much the prices have been dropping compared to foreign brands. Between 2018 and 2025, over 400 auto brands have gone bankrupt. AlixPartners predicts only 15 will be financially viable by 2030. Even less will survive long-term. But the ones that survive are coming out of a competitive environment that protected industries almost never produce. By 2023, all this competition had produced cars that weren't just cheap, but in some measurable ways actually better than their Western counterparts. Chinese EV companies are reportedly 30% faster in developing new models than Western legacy car makers, with better software, more advanced interior tech, and new designs, like what the industry calls cell-to-body, where BYD builds the battery directly into the car's frame, and the domestic market flip was dramatic. In 2020, foreign brands held about 60% of the Chinese passenger car market. By 2024, Chinese brands held 65%. Volkswagen, once the iconic brand of urban China, was getting outsold by BYD. General Motors China sales had collapsed. Hyundai had to overhaul everything. The Chinese partners didn't end up just catching up. They made the technology those foreign partners had been protecting essentially obsolete. What's even crazier, and what most people don't even realize, is that in 2023, the year China officially overtook Japan as the world's top car exporter, over 75% of China's vehicle exports were actually gasoline cars, not EVs. All that competition inside China didn't just produce world-class EVs. It also produced, almost as a byproduct, ICE cars that are finally becoming competitive in mid-market segments. Chery, which many Western viewers have probably never heard of, exported 1.3 million vehicles in 2025, making it the largest Chinese vehicle exporter, ahead of BYD. And most of what it sells abroad is ICE. While again these cars are mostly going to developing countries, they're also starting to go to Europe, which is where things get politically interesting. In 2025, Chinese automakers sold 811,000 units in Europe, up 99% year-over-year. By December that year, Chinese brands captured 9.5% of the European market, outselling South Korean rivals on a quarterly basis for the first time. Keep in mind, the EU has no tariffs on South Korean cars, while it does on China, ranging from 7.8% to 35.3% depending on the automaker. As for the US, in May 2024, Biden quadrupled tariffs on Chinese EVs to 100% and added a 25% tariff on critical EV components to curb supply chain reliance. But BYD's response to all this really tells you how confident they are. They're building factories outside China to bypass tariffs entirely. Thailand's factory opened July 2024. Brazil's Kamakari factory rolled its first car off the line in July 2025, just 15 months from groundbreaking. Hungary has their first European plant. They're even building a fleet of 8 purpose-built car carrier vessels capable of carrying up to 9,200 vehicles each. BYD exported over 1 million vehicles in 2025, up 140% year-over-year. Of course, this push to export isn't just about growing bigger. They kind of have to. The domestic price war is brutal, and the numbers just don't work if they stay in China. BYD invested $7.5 billion in R&D in 2024, exceeding its own net profit, something it's done 13 out of 14 years since 2011. As a whole, Chinese R&D is crushing it, in both electric batteries and electric vehicles. Now, this is the part that gets the least coverage in American media, because it requires admitting something uncomfortable. The US government says their way of handling this is about unfair subsidies, supply chain security, and national security. And those concerns are very real, but the scale of the wall also reveals something more basic. American automakers are simply not ready to compete with Chinese EVs, especially on price. That's why Ford CEO Jim Farley even said China can put us all out of business, and we shouldn't let them into our country. The American auto industry is in worse shape than anyone wants to admit. And even other dominant countries like Germany and Japan are struggling too. The average price of a new car in the US passed $50,000 in September 2025 for the first time ever. Nearly 1/3 of new vehicle buyers owe more on their car than the car is worth. Meanwhile, BYD's Seagull starts at just $8,000 in China. The cost of the wall isn't being paid by China. It's being paid by American consumers. Don't get me wrong, American protectionism has succeeded in keeping Chinese EVs out. but it failed to make American carmakers competitive, especially with some of these government policies in 2025. In the end, we're now seeing the technology transfer flowing in the opposite direction. In 2023, Volkswagen took a $700 million stake in XPeng, essentially paying for access to Chinese EV technology. Stellantis formed a reverse joint venture with Leapmotor. Toyota is buying Chinese-made components for its Thai factories. There are more examples too. So, what does this actually mean? Well, the question isn't whether Chinese automakers will become major global players. They already are. The question is what the West can do in response. The auto industry is roughly 3% of global GDP, the largest manufactured goods category in international trade. China produced 34.5 million vehicles in 2025, an all-time high. Its home market is almost as big as the American and European markets combined. If the auto map is being redrawn, the economic map of the entire developed world is being redrawn with it. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. I'll see you in the next one.